Hey guys, welcome to another movie review. Today I'm talking about a film that's a part of both the Despicable Me and the Minions franchise, and that is the film Minions and Monsters. For me personally, before I get into the review, I've enjoyed Despicable Me. Like I've only seen the first film. I enjoyed it for what it was. It was never really a franchise where I had to see like every single sequel, every single spin-off. Um, for the most part, I really have only seen the first one in this new film. So I'm kind of going into this kind of just seeing only two out of the many Despicable Me films that they've made for this franchise. But I've enjoyed Despicable Me. I think the Minions are cute. I think I always find enjoyment whenever I see something cute merchandise wise with the Minions and stuff like that. But in this film, you guys, we do go back to roughly like the 1920s, 1930s, and the Minions are kind of trying to figure out where they want to live. They try to live with the Cyclops. They try to go to Japan. They try to go to all this stuff, and they really can't find an owner. They really, Gru clearly isn't in the picture yet. Gru is either not born yet or he's too young to be their master at this point, and that's the Steve Carell character from the very first Despicable Me movie. And so they eventually kind of find their voice and their footing when they stumble across this director in Hollywood that is in a weird time where silent films are still being made, but they're kind of transitioning over to talkies now. And so both himself and everybody else are kind of trying to figure out what their place in Hollywood's going to be through this transition. And so he kind of makes this break when he does meet the Minions, when they become a part of a scene where he has to show his producers dailies to see if they're happy with the project. And so when he shows them footage that happen to have the Minions in the footage, that's kind of when his career starts taking off. The Minions start finding their place in Hollywood, and that's also kind of where the story really starts picking up. And so the Minions kind of go and get into a rut, though, when they get into a position where they're transitioning over to talkie films, and they're still speaking gibberish the way that we've known them to do throughout these Minion and Despicable Me films. And so obviously that does not make the producers happy. They either have to get with the times or move on from Hollywood. And so the Minions kind of find a way to kind of make a comeback film through a monster film. But in order to do this, they have to go find a real monster out in the real world somewhere and bring it to the set to film it for those scenes in their movie. And so throughout the rest of the film, the Minions have to figure out where are they going to find this monster, who's going to help them find this monster, since the director really has no knowledge of where to find a creature like that. But he's willing to loan them a camera and do all this other stuff as a director to help them out. And so throughout the rest of the film, they have to figure out, where are they going to find a monster? What kind of monster are they even going to use for the film? And how are they going to bring it to the set to convince this monster to be a part of their film? And this all happens over the course of Minions and Monsters. But overall, guys, I actually really enjoyed this film quite a bit. What really kind of drew me to this film was when the trailers started coming out, when the concept was revealed for what exactly this next Minions film was going to be. Because, like I said at the beginning of the video, I enjoyed that first Despicable Me film. It's an enjoyable enough movie, but I never really wanted to track down the sequels. I never really wanted to get into the Minions spin off films. But like any franchise, if there's a good enough idea going for it, if the concept is strong, if the people involved with it are strong, which I'll get into here in a little bit, like any franchise, I'm going to show up to kind of see what it's all about. And, if the reviews are good like they have been for this film, of course I'm going to show up to kind of see what all the fuss is about. And I am here to report that this new Minions film is quite wonderful. It is a very, very well-made movie. And so there's some positives and negatives that I want to bring up with each and every one of you watching the video as to why I really enjoyed this film. But there's some other things about it that I think could have been better. But as far as my first Minions / Despicable Me film in a long time, I am very happy with what I got here. So first and foremost with this film, you guys, this film very much is a love letter to classic cinema. It is a love letter to, Citizen Kane and Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin and old science fiction movies and old Western movies. And so there's a lot of things that this film homages to throughout the film that really is quite wonderful. And I like how a lot of real world films definitely work their way into this film. Even something as small as a character once played by Humphrey Bogart in Casablanca the character is referred to as Humphrey, just to really make it clear that that's a nod to Casablanca and stuff like that. And so there's moments throughout the movie that play out where they are using, films that you could track down in real life and watch, while also kind of playing off of ideas of films that exist, but it's kind of doing its own thing as far as like the westerns, or homaging Jaws in this other scene, or homaging The Day the Earth Stood Still and all this other stuff. And so just the way they have a big love letter to classic films, just super enjoyable to watch over the course of this film. And I also do like that this film really is a tale about immigration and finding a way for people to understand the person you're trying to be, and being able to kind of take a craft that you have on something and being able to transition it to something that really is meaningful to a lot of people, and adds a lot of meaning to the people that live on the land, and are looking for ways to improve upon their craft as well. And so I do like how we have these really creative minions that are in this group. And so when they make their way to Hollywood, they really do have a lot of good ideas on storyboarding, good ideas, and literally bringing a monster to the set for a monster movie. And like I said, a tale of immigration where finding where you really should be, finding out where you really belong, finding out where you have a craft that could be transitioned over to another culture, and how that could be meaningful to somebody else. And so I do like how this film is able to balance all these ideas and themes into a meaningful film like this. There's also a character played by Jesse Eisenberg, of all people, from The Social Network. His character is Dort, I think is his character's name, and his subplot's a lot of fun. He really is kind of this robot leader to the minions at one point in the film, and it's just a fun little subplot that does kind of play into the bigger plot of the film at a later time in the movie. And it's probably the most fun I've ever had with a Jesse Eisenberg character in a film. Of course, I've loved The Social Network and other projects he's been in, but this is the most fun I've had with a Jesse Eisenberg character in a film. He really is I really have a hard time envisioning somebody else playing this character now that he did such a great job playing the part. And the character of Dort has a very fun subplot to the movie, like I said, that adds into the bigger plot eventually. And so if you're looking for a fun subplot to be included within this film, I think his character did a great job with that. There's also a character played by Christoph Waltz in the movie, who voices the character of this director that helps the minions kind of make their big break in Hollywood. And you really get behind his character. He really is trying to make the best possible films that he can. He really is trying to make sure that the minions find their footing in Hollywood too. Even when they got to go out and find this monster, he's still very supportive of them. And so he plays a very fun character in this film as well. So it was cool seeing such a great, Academy Award, I think 2-time Academy Award winning actor, if I'm not mistaken, play this director character, and he did a brilliant job playing the character too. And like I mentioned before, and kind of playing off of a different point, this film does homage to almost all forms of cinema, whether it is blockbuster cinema, silent films, the golden age of Hollywood, even to a degree certain kind of modern films play a role in this too. And so I do like how this film does homage to several different kind of eras of cinema. So whether you are a fan of classic films or modern films, or specifically science fiction, specifically westerns, I think there's a lot to love here as far as homaging to all those other films and all those genres of films. So I thought that was a very fun way for this film to be brought to life in that sense. And overall, too, I just felt like this is a very fun direction to take the Minions franchise, if we are indeed going to get more of these films, and more of these films that are leaning into this new direction that this film introduced us to. Because I do like the idea of, these minions working within the film industry now that they have this big monster hit on their hands. What exactly is that going to mean for the minions in future installments? For me personally, I kind of hope they lead into, when Spielberg released Jaws, and how the summer blockbuster season and the idea of a summer blockbuster season really started to make its way into mainstream culture and cinema. So it'd be interesting to see kind of how the Minions transition over to the era of, Jaws and E.T. and all these other big films, not just with Spielberg, but with other big directors too from that time, and kind of how they found their footing and stayed relevant themselves within a culture in an era of cinema such as that one. But for my negatives of Minions and Monsters, unfortunately, the film does get very antics heavy at one point, and after a while, it does feel a little exhausting because there is a lot of times in the movie where the minions get in trouble and they have to figure out how to get out of trouble, and then they stumble upon a scenario where it feels like a Looney Tunes cartoon where they have to stop a train, or they have to stop a cowboy, or they have to stop somebody stealing money, or they have to stop a monster. And so it does get very antics heavy after a while, and it does feel a little exhausting even at the 90-minute mark that this film goes to. So I thought that aspect of the story probably could have been better handled because, like I said, it does feel a little exhausting after a while. I also thought, believe it or not, for being a Minions and Monsters movie, I thought some of the monster portions, believe it or not, were not quite as interesting as Minions working in the film industry, or the Minions finding a new home through immigration, or the Minions finding their own voice and a sense of understanding within society. I thought the monster portion of the film, believe it or not, was just not quite as interesting with some of the other elements and subplots that they're playing off of. Even the subplot with Dort that I brought up earlier felt a little more fun than the stuff they were doing with the monsters. So, unfortunately, for being a film called Minions and Monsters, when that would suggest that a big portion of the film and the big whole of the film would be about the monsters. Unfortunately, some of the monster portions of the story are not quite as fun as the cinema portions of it. And then maybe this is just a personal preference, but there is times in the movie where the minion dialogue is either extremely limited, where they say stuff clearly like what I'm doing to you now, or there's times where they just go back to the gibberish of what the minions are known for. And for me personally, I think I prefer, hopefully this is moving forward too, they're going to do this more often, but I think giving the minions limited dialogue is more effective than just relying on the gibberish stuff all the time. Because when you rely on the gibberish stuff, it's hard to tell as an audience member if we're supposed to listen in on what they're actually trying to say, or if they are going to have limited dialogue the way certain scenes in this film suggest. So for me personally, moving forward with the Minions franchise, I would just say give them limited dialogue the same way that maybe like Rowan Atkinson had to do when he played Mr. Bean, rather than just relying on the gibberish, because there is times where it's hard to tell whether we're supposed to keep up with what they're saying, or if they are just given limited dialogue to kind of keep up with what they're doing and what they're trying to do. And then they do try to connect with the Gru stuff near the end of the movie. I would say specifically in the post-credits stuff, which I feel really doesn't give much away, because you would imagine some of this stuff has to connect with other Despicable Me and Minions films, specifically the stuff with Gru, who's this significant Steve Carell character in the franchise. They do try to connect with it. I feel like more time could have been spent with that, because when they are trying to connect with where all this stuff and all these scenarios are connected to Gru and the Russell Brand scientist and stuff like that, I felt very invested. I felt very intrigued with how they were trying to connect that together. Unfortunately, they don't spend a ton of time with it. So hopefully in future installments we do get more time with how this does connect to Gru and other stuff that we saw throughout the Despicable Me franchise. But overall, guys, I'm going to give Minions and Monsters an 8.5 out of 10. It's a very enjoyable film. It's very insightful on the entertainment industry and about film in general. And I love all the nods to classic cinema that it does. And like I said, that Dort subplot with Jesse Eisenberg is a lot of fun here too. But like I said, a couple of negatives along the way that prevent this from being an absolutely fantastic film. But it is an 8.5 out of 10 for me. I really enjoyed it. I do highly recommend that you see it. So if you're sick of the Minion films, if you're not completely convinced of this franchise yet, I really do hope that Minions and Monsters can kind of persuade you to think of that a little bit differently. Hopefully it'll get you more interested like I am now with more Minions films, specifically Minion films that deal with classic cinema, would deal with Minions working within the film industry and things of that nature. So it's an 8.5 out of 10 for me. I really enjoyed this film. And if you're intrigued to see it, if you're really intrigued by this concept like I was for this movie, I think it is worth checking out. But if you're one of those people where you really are turned off by the Minions, if you're really turned off by Despicable Me and you really didn't even like that first film very much, I don't think this film is going to persuade you very much necessarily. But I do think it is worth checking out personally as a recommendation. It's an 8.5 out of 10 for me. I recommend seeing it. Be sure to see Minions and Monsters.